The conventional understanding is that one shouldn't stop learning. And if one stops learning, one is guilty of a crime when you cease your learning. However, I heard in the name of Rabbi Fold, and also Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes a magnificent idea which really is essential for this entire conference. And the key word here is umafsik mimishnaso. A person ceases his learning and separates his analysis or his appreciation of the tree from his learning. Because in fact, when one looks at the beauty of nature, and in fact the human being is compared to the tree, Adam ke'etz hasadeh, and looks at the anatomy of the human body, the physiology, the embryology of the human body, and believes that this is something separate and distinct from their learning, that in fact is a crime. If someone appreciates that looking at the inner workings of the human body and understanding them is actually part and parcel of our learning, and a key mitzvah of Talmud Torah to be able to understand these things, that is the ideal of Torah. So that is really what this conference is all about. To discuss the issues of science, to discuss the issues of medicine. We will be learning a great deal about medicine over this conference. That medicine is not Bittul Torah. That medicine is as much Torah as the Rambams that we are learning and the Gemaras that we are learning, and the Shachs and the Tazes that we are learning, because they give us an appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Medical halacha of the past was slightly different. In past centuries, for example, we had discussions in the 16th century about whether one could use human flesh from ancient Egyptian mummies for medicinal purposes. And the rabbis of the 15th century addressed that in many fascinating discussions. In the 17th century, we had discussions about smallpox inoculation, the very first of vaccinations. And the rabbis of the 17th and 18th century addressed whether it would be permissible to inject something into the human body that would actually potentially cause disease, even though the ultimate objective was to cure human disease. And in the 18th century and beyond, we began to discuss anatomical dissection. And Mirza Hashem on Shabbos, we will have an opportunity to discuss this further. In the present era, moving into the 20th and 21st century, the face of Jewish medical ethics has changed. We now have many books that are devoted exclusively to this beautiful field of Jewish medical ethics, and of course, the extraordinary Encyclopedia of Jewish Medical Ethics, in its second edition and translated into English, and many other authors, Rabbi Bleich, Rabbi Tendler, Dr. Rosner, Dr. Abraham, have contributed bountifully to the field of Jewish medical ethics. All of these volumes devoted exclusively to the field of Jewish medical ethics, a product of the 21st century, 20th and 21st century. But now we turn our eyes even beyond, into the 21st century. And as Thomas Jefferson wrote in the 1800s, laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths disclosed, institutions must advance also and keep pace with the times. Now that was written in 1810. All the more so 200 years later, when medicine is advancing at a staggering pace, that we need to keep pace with the times. And in that vein, I created this fictional journal called the Journal of Anticipatory Medical Halacha. And we have come quite far in the 21st century in fields of beginning of life, of transplantation, of end-of-life issues, of cloning, to such an extent that a scientist has had the audacity to approach God to say, God, we can do just about everything you can do. In fact, we can create man like you did at the beginning. I'm not so sure we need you anymore, God. So God turns to the scientist and said, you can create man. How do you do such a thing? So the scientist says, well, we take some dirt, we bring it to the laboratory, we add some enzymes, we inject some air with a pipette, and we can create man. So God says, why don't you show me? So the scientist proceeds to bend down and pick up the dirt, and God says, no, no, no. You get your own dirt. So despite the fact that scientists genuinely believe that they can control every aspect of the human being from beginning of life and before to end of life and after, we as Torah-observant Jews know that absolutely everything that happens on the face of the earth is because of God above. As a result, it behooves us to understand how the Torah would approach all these new and extraordinary advances. And what we will do is we will proceed from the beginning of life to the end of life, drawing on modern technology, modern advances, and theorizing about potential halachic ramifications of some of this new technology. All the technology we are going to be discussing this evening is based on real science, either at research that's in its infancy or perhaps further progressed. None of this is science fiction in the classic sense. We will begin at the beginning. For those of you who can't read the cartoon from the back, they're sitting with a kangaroo here with a little child on its lap and says, "We had trouble finding a surrogate mother." So at a conference in England a number of years ago, and this is just but one example, a conference entitled Animal-Human Embryonic Combinations and Ethical Discussion. And in there they wrote, it could be argued that if incubation of an embryo in an animal were to yield valuable information about the causes of infertility, then this is an appropriate use of the embryo and consistent with its status. And scientists are experimenting in different parts of the world with the possibility of taking a human embryo and implanting it into an animal. So the question would be, aside from the propriety of doing such a procedure, the question would be, what is the status of an embryo which grows to become a child that is produced in the womb of a cow? Is it possible to say that your mother-in-law is a cow? Now, we are not going to resolve this issue, but I just bring your attention to a fascinating discussion thousands of years ago in the Talmud, which bears relevance to this discussion, gives you a notion that even thousands of years ago, the rabbis were at least giving thought to this concept. So we have a Gemara in Nida, Hamapelas min behema chaya v'of. If a woman miscarries a being which appears to be like an animal, bein tamein bein ta'arin, im zachar teshev l'zachar, im nekeva teshev nekeva. If that being that she miscarries, which has animal features, appears to the viewer to be an animal, then if it's a male child, then she would observe the laws of purity and impurity that relate to a male child. And if it's a female fetus, then it would be the laws of a female fetus. Implication being that this being that she miscarries, that appears animaloid, is actually has the status of a human being. So the Gemara later on says, according to Rav Meir, who had said previously that if a woman gives birth to a creature which has the features of an animal, that creature has the status of a human being. If a human is within the womb of an animal, what is the status of that creature when it's born? So the Gemara asks, "L'may nafkamina?" What does it make a halachic difference? So the Gemara answers, "L'ishtaruye b'achila." Are you permitted to eat it? If you shecht the cow, and there's an animal being within the cow, are you permitted to eat that being or not permitted to eat that being? So here you have a fascinating discussion, in theory obviously, hypothetical discussion, about this notion of interspecies mixture. The possibility of different species mixing, and what are the potential halachic ramifications. And the poskim of our generation have begun to address this. The source that I quoted was from Rav Levi Yitzchak Halpern in his Maaseh Choshev, where he writes a brief entry, Hashtalat Beitzit Mufrit Berechem Behema, a fertilized human embryo in the fetus of an animal. And Chanina Rottenberg, in a small essay in Divrei Chanina, begins to address this. And they actually theoretically entertain the possibility that if an animal gives birth to a human being, the technical halachic mother might indeed be the animal.